Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Monday, January 8th. So, let's hop into Yu-Gi-Oh! Here. Apparently there's a tryout duel summary, a survey, if I can read right. What else? As far as notifications, maintenance notice. And also, seems like maintenance notice should really just be a maintenance schedule or calendar. It's actually a little surprising that you don't have systems like that in general. I guess it's just that much more. It takes a few more hours to program a calendar and show a calendar on a computer than it does to just have a scrolling list of notices, but I mean, it really should just be there's a maintenance schedule. If there's emergency maintenance, then give a notification, but then you should just also warn people that there is a maintenance schedule. Maybe warn people 5 minutes before going down for scheduled maintenance or an hour before going down for scheduled maintenance. I mean, you basically have something like that here too, but then it's scrolling between several other advertisements, which arguably, if they really cared about these advertisements, perhaps it should be just one giant screen over here full of ads, which I wouldn't be happy with that unless there was a giant screen here that was just streaming some kind of Twitch channel showing Yu-Gi-Oh! Cartoons, and the ads were inserted in between the Twitch channel, which I don't know if you can really embed Twitch like that. And you can embed YouTube, but I'm not sure I've really seen an embedded stream. So you could do a YouTube live stream certainly here, and just constantly every day have episodes of Yu-Gi-Oh! Streaming. So over the weekend, for the accountability section, I finished playing Skyward Sword. Skyward Sword, I said previously, just not really knowing, that it felt like it could have been slightly before Breath of the Wild in the very nebulous timeline of Zelda, or that it could even be far past the events of Tears of the Kingdom. But actually, it turns out Skyward Sword is the very first game in the timeline, which, amongst many annoyances, is one major annoyance I have certainly with that game. There are two timelines to consider certainly with Skyward Sword. There is the fact that they have set this as a prequel when they first released it, I imagine because it was so different, in a way that they could say, well, we just experimented with a lot of stuff in Skyward Sword, but then we're going to potentially abandon it for the next game, which Skyward Sword was probably the game right before Breath of the Wild. I don't think there was a Zelda game in between them, as far as the chronological release schedule timeline. And it definitely feels like it is taking that middle step of becoming what Breath of the Wild became, and my fairly highly negative reaction to Breath of the Wild, in the sense that it was just not really an adventure game at that point. It's not a Zelda game at the very least. It is, Breath of the Wild is very much a item collectathon game with no dungeons, and you're just running around. There's 4 divine beasts that are sort of like dungeons, but even by Skyward Sword standards, the divine beasts are nothing. It's basically one room for each divine beast of the 2 or 3 divine beasts I did of the 4 that exist. But yeah, sticking to just Skyward Sword's complaints, there's incredibly large amounts of points where I just didn't know what to do. I had to go to a walkthrough at least 7 or 8 times just not knowing where to go, what to do. One of the very last things you have to do is find where you place a gem, and the gem you collect to place is kind of orangish, and you're supposed to match it with a socket where there's another gem that's red, so the colors just don't even match. So there's no real logical reason why you would do that. Plus, the gem in the menu that you've collected is depicted as being fairly large, whereas the gem you're supposed to match it with is shown in the world as being very small. So they don't match in color, they don't match in size, they're really not showing a shape there either. Plus, the place where you're supposed to place the gem is something that you really would have just walked past throughout the entirety of the game, and maybe thought about it and just thought, oh, this is some extra secret thing that will get me 100 rupees, like so many other of the side quests that give you just insignificant amount of rupees, which rupees are another major problem in the game, in that you can have you can get a wallet to own 9,000 rupees. There's nothing to buy for that is over 1,900 rupees, so there's just no reason to even get it. And that is also true for every single monster part and bug piece after a point. Like some of the very difficult items, like blue feathers, which you have to get from blue birds, which you have to get from one of the 3 major land masses exclusively. Those you need to get probably 10 or 20 of them, but everything else is you're gonna get 20-30 extra copies of every other bug and monster part, and it's not easy. There's no store to just sell every single bug extra, and there's no interface to do it in a good method. If you want to sell bugs, you have to find the character at nighttime that will buy bugs. He'll only buy 3 random assortments of bugs at a time, so you would have to sleep over and over again, resetting to the next night to get a different selection. When you do want to sell bugs, it offers you to sell 1, 5, or all of them, and maybe none of them is the 4th option. But there's no like pick a number as far as how many you would want to sell specifically, or quick way to do it. It's just no shopkeeper interface at all. As far as monster parts, I don't believe there's any place where you can sell monster parts, so you'll just have a ton of them. Now there is a hero mode where those items carry over as far as bugs and monster parts, but it doesn't seem like anything else carries over, so you would have to buy a new shield and upgrade a new shield using the excess bugs and monster parts. And hero mode on the game is ridiculous and not even worth trying, because it's just, you cannot find hearts at all in the game. You have to rely on potions. You would have to heavily then rely on having money to buy potions, and you'd constantly just go back to the one potion vendor in the entire game to buy potions, and use monster parts and bugs to upgrade your potions so they're more useful. Like, it's not a good system. Most of the systems in the game are not good. So I have complaints about it as a game. I also have complaints about it as a Zelda story, because now knowing that it is the prequel, or the first game in the timeline, that means that the Zelda character and Link character you're playing as in Skyward Sword are the canonically first Zelda and Link characters. Every other Zelda in the game is from the bloodline of that Zelda and that Link. And every other Zelda in the timeline is named Zelda after the original Zelda. And even that, you can kind of dance around because the Zelda in Skyward Sword is supposed to be like a reincarnation, a mortal form of a Hylian goddess, but some kind of new goddess I've never heard of, not the ones before that I have heard of. Hope I'm doing the right thing here. Links are still kind of random links because otherwise you would just have this weird inbreeding where every Link character would also be from the same bloodline as the original Zelda and Link. You fight a bad guy named Demise at the very last second, and there's a lot of aspects here that that makes this really feel like there was a possibility that this game was not going to be a Zelda game, and they just fairly quickly added Zelda elements to it, because the enemy you fight named Demise only looks like Ganondorf at the very last fight. Otherwise it looks like this giant monster, and Demise basically in one sentence after you defeat him says his reincarnations, Ganondorf, will come and haunt your generations. So they will constantly battle you. So he puts this kind of curse on you, and that's allegedly, I guess, why you just constantly have these repeated cycles of Ganondorf trying to defeat Link. Although really Ganondorf's not trying to defeat Link in any game, he's really just trying to get the Triforce and make controls. The Triforce in this game can grant wishes, I think, a lot more than it can in most other games, most other Zelda games. Like, and I looked up the timeline on Zelda, and it's really a mess because the Triforce has been forgotten. Pieces of the Triforce have been forgotten about and broken up in several different games in several different ways. So there's like originally supposed to be a Triforce of wisdom, courage, and power. So 3 Triforces. One of the Triforces gets forgotten about according to the most recent timeline. One of the Triforces, or 2 of them, get broken into smaller pieces, and then you have to collect the pieces in some games. So yeah, they're very fast and loose with it, but the fact that they don't say Triforce at all in Skyward Sword until you're at least into the 4th act of a 4-act play definitely is suspect. And they never say Ganon and Ganondorf. They don't call the Master Sword until fairly late in the game. So yeah, there's just very loose connection to other elements you would expect in the Zelda universe, and then some weirdness definitely around the Zelda universe too, in that you have this assistant character that is some kind of spirit that guides you in the Master Sword, and apparently it just goes dormant and is dormantly sleeping in the Master Sword in every other game, and that's why you don't see this assistant character in any of the other games, which is fine. But having this idea that in every other Zelda game the Master Sword has what felt like an AI character. And see, that's kind of what I was thinking would have been a cool twist if the big surprise here was that this entire experience was just happening in a virtual reality experience inside Link's brain, and then that would just lead directly into Breath of the Wild. And I guess there's still room where they could make a game like that, where it is much more technology based and just has some weird technology to it. Breath of the Wild definitely had some feeling of some weird technology to it. But yeah, Fi is the name of the character, or Fi, and her dancing around is never explained as far as why she's kind of ice skating dancing in several sequences. The musical aspect of the game is definitely shoved in there, and that you have a harp, but really you just swing it back and forth. Clearly that was just a gimmick for the Wiimote, and there's so much of that. A major part of the gimmicks for the Wiimotes is the slashing mechanic, and I nearly did not figure out how to play the game at all, and heavily struggled with it throughout the entire game, just because when playing on a regular controller, the right stick, my natural instinct would be, if I want to swipe a sword left, I would go all the way to the left on the right stick, and then I would go all the way to the right. That would be a follow through style slashing of a sword, and you would always follow through with swinging a sword. You wouldn't go halfway through the body of somebody and stop swinging. Well, the controllers are programmed for the exact opposite, and it messes up your strokes and uses up your stamina every time you follow through. So I was struggling through easily 80% of the game because I was not realizing that you actually should be just from the centered right stick. You should be flicking it to the right and then letting it return, and then flicking it to the right and letting it return. And you can do that fairly fast. And as soon as I figured that out for a right slash, and the same as for an up slash, you flick it up, then let it return to the center, flick it up. You only go all the way to the left or right if you want to do a spin attack, which takes more stamina and time. Which, yeah, that creates a situation where I could have done so much better as far as every single boss fight struggling because I was not controlling the game correctly and the game was not explaining that, which gets back to its crypticness. It's a really bad game. And I think most people would probably agree with that. I definitely didn't hear a lot of hype around Skyward Sword. In fact, I would say, at least from my perspective, after Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker, there really wasn't any hype at all around the other Zelda games. With Majora's Mask being too weird. Which definitely there's some weirdness in some of those games that feels like they should have been a Zelda game. And I would say Skyward Sword has an element, at least in it, that makes it feel like it was at part going to be a Zelda game too. Not a Zelda game, a Metroid Prime game, or a Metroid game. Because there is an aspect that you use where you dig under the ground and you're looking top down at these underground tunnels, and it definitely feels a little too close to being able to the Metroid Prime being in a spinball sections and working around tunnels as Samus Aran in Metroid Prime. It's not 100% there, but it definitely doesn't feel Zelda-esque. There's also a whole, what I would call Metal Gear Solid element in Skyward Sword, where you get captured and lose all of your abilities and you have to sneak around. In fact, there are several sections where you have to just sneak around, which sneaking around does not feel like Zelda to me. There's never been stealth mechanics, and even in Breath of the Wild, there's really not stealth mechanics. You fight the same boss, 4 different iterations of the same boss throughout the entirety of the game as the main big boss, and it's repetitive and annoying, and you don't have that in Zelda games usually. The very final temple is weirdly a square temple. where you can slide the rooms around and magically change the location of the rooms and have to Rubik's Cube your way through the through it. And even in that case, it just highlights how all the temples are way smaller than they feel like they should be, because it's an 8-room temple as the very last temple, and while the rooms may be fairly large compared to the tiny rooms in the original Zelda game, the final temple in the original Zelda game easily had 20 or 30 rooms in it, and on average there was way more rooms in all the temples in the original Zelda game, even though they were very small rooms with nothing going on in them. The bigger complaint about the final temple is that there are just points where they throw some old enemies back at you and you're just fighting again, when at that point in particular I was already totally uninterested in fighting and didn't see a need for there to be 2 or 3 extra sub-bosses when I knew I was just working my way up to the final boss, which there was a sub-boss even before that. Like, Demise is actually the main bad guy. You also fight his subordinate character, which I don't know if I even caught the name of that character 3 or 4 times throughout the game, and he's just a weird looking character that doesn't really get explained well as far as why they look that way. So yeah, there's quite a lot I didn't like with Skyward Sword, and overall I do feel like it is a case where this was the point where Zelda lost me, and I know I got busy and didn't even play those games, and maybe I'm just one of many people who got busy of that first generation of Zelda fans that got busy and stopped playing Zelda games. But they definitely shifted. The weird spirituality, or Asian spirituality to the game, is also very weird. It's basically Mahjong, but there was a water dragon I met first last time, and after that point I met a thunder dragon that also looks very Asian, and the sky whale, which would be the Mahjong like blank dragon or fake dragon, and then there's another dragon. There's a thunder dragon, a water dragon, and a fire dragon. Which, yeah, that's Mahjong. That's just Asian spirituality. The dragon of the north, the south, the east, and the west. How does that in any way connect to other Zelda games? I have no idea. I imagine you fought a dragon at some point in previous other Zelda games, but there's never really been a case where dragons were special, or that there was really a lot of Asian influence. Even the eyes of Zelda, of this Link, looks very Asian. The whole face, it has perhaps slightly bigger anime eyes, big pupils. I imagine they just didn't bother to localize it or make it look more Western, like they may have done in other versions, because this is based off the HD version, so maybe they upgraded the textures for the Japanese audience and then just translated the face texture over without changing it, whereas many games still will take a game where you have more of an Asian faced featured character and make it look more like a Westerner, which, traditionally speaking, and this is not me trying to justify xenophobia or anything, but traditionally speaking, I would say that Zelda games are much more in the realm of the Tolkien-esque fantasies, so Lord of the Ring type fantasies, and traditionally speaking, of course I am making an argument based on what has happened in the past, which is not always a good argument to make, But yeah, traditionally speaking, Tolkien-esque fantasies have European, English, Western features. The hobbits, the elves, that's the way they've been depicted in the past, that's the way they tend to look. There's it would probably come off fairly racist if you saw a more black-haired, shorter, smaller eye-slitted character that had more Asian features in a Lord of the Rings style fantasy story. You could do it, certainly, but you would need to create a tribe, you'd need to make a backstory, you'd need to justify it and explain it, and you'd need to be very careful and walk on eggshells to not make it come off as this is just the insulting caricature of Asians. Which, let's just be honest here, in the age of Tolkien almost certainly, if he had any opinion on Asians, it was a negative one. Like the British Empire and the English people certainly may have had some kind of exotic like fantasies around Asians, but they certainly wouldn't have thought of them as good, proper Englishmen, with whom, which I imagine most English people at that time would have thought were genetically superior and better in every way. But yeah, having the 4 dragons doesn't really do anything. The Thunder Dragon, after you defeat the main story part about it, has this whole extra element. The game has several mini games that you could do, but there's really no reason to do them. Particularly since the heroic mode in Skyward Sword is not as good as the Master Quest mode. I think it doesn't carry over enough items. Like, if you were at full health and you had all of your items, and then you were going to give me a very difficult mode where I couldn't ever pick up hearts, that's one thing. But then to reset myself down to 8 hearts and reset myself to having no shield and the basic swords is asking quite a lot. But and you definitely would have had to enjoy the first game to want to play heroic mode, which I definitely didn't. So yeah, after you do the main story part with the Thunder Dragon, if you go back, he'll challenge you to speed boss rush several of the bosses, and it seems like the ones that aren't in that boss rush you have to do in the main final temple. That final temple was fine, but it wasn't anything special, and I guess that is a problem that they never really did solve, as far as how are you going to potentially take what should be square rooms and turn them into larger open world sections. There we go. We've got a quick disconnect, and with that I can be done with this dumb rental trial. All that work, 38 minutes of work to get 1 pack of cards. So will any of these be worth it, would be the question. Well, we've got 2 new cards, 1 rare, 1 neutral. So yeah, I would not really say that was worth it by any means. It would be very hard for 8 cards to be worth it for as much time and effort I just spent doing all of that. Did I really learn anything? Well, I definitely didn't learn anything as far as this deck. I probably didn't learn anything as far as this deck. And maybe the Dragon Maid deck I learned a little bit. Meanwhile, it's the beginning of the month, and the move would be to play ranked and get back up into rank. However, first things first, let's do the proficiency test too, so we just continuously make progress on this. We need to ritual summon, pendulum summon, and link summon as far as the practical exam. And then we need to get 5 out of 8. I bet this takes at least 4 or 5 tries to get this right. Question number 1, what's the name of this card? Let's go with this long one. Nope, just Crystal Skull. Okay. Let's see. In solo mode, which of the following did Crit decide in order to purify the plant? Extracting, eradicating all plant life from the life of the plant. You'll always face stuff on the extra deck when you leave the field. Okay, they always have a pendulum scale. Let's see, who owns the mansion in solo mode? I'm gonna go with Alhard. How in the world would am I supposed to know that one? The crown. How are you supposed to remember any of that? This light looking card is a dark card. Let's go with this one. So significantly leaning on solo mode stuff. So that was 2 out of 8. So now can I remember what I just picked? Yeah. That's gonna be the trick here, is to remember the right answers, forget the wrong answers, and hope they don't change the questions too much on you. Yeah, crazy that this is a dark card when it looks light. Now, if this was really tricky, it'd probably ask me what's the name of this card next time, instead of asking the same things. Five out of 8. Completely different thing. Let's just pick something here. Sent to the graveyard and the effect can be activated again. No, this is the crown. Let's go with this one. Nope. Same one again. Pot of Desires, I think is... Nope, it's that one. I would have, if I just looked at the picture, I would have gotten that one right. What's the name of this card? So 3 out of 8 that time. Several new questions were introduced. Yeah, and you're just really going to end up brute forcing this thing. Let's go with Baron. Viscount. See, I'm not even reading these walls of text. I'm not even going to bother to read them. So it's Pot of Extravagance. I'll just guess them, get the wrong answer, and figure out what what the right answer is later. I'll read a sentence. Nope. I clicked on the wrong one there. Yeah. So I'm still very far away from the right, getting it right. I'm just slowly getting one more answer right, so it may take me 3 more tries. Each fallen cannot be activated after monsters are born. It's sent to the graveyard. I would imagine it's Obelisk of the Tormentor. No, Hungry Bird. What's the name of this card? I have no idea. Guess. Statistically, eventually you would get here. You would just random guessing, eventually get it right. Their defense is 0, they have no defense. Let's see. I think I picked that one. Let's go with this one. File number? Wow. Let's go with a low number. Since it looks like a small character, small creature. There we go. 6 out of 8 questions correct. Yeah, I just don't really see a real reason for this to exist. And it just feels like wherever you're going to be on your journey as far as your experience with Yu-Gi-Oh, you're not going to be in line with a lot of these questions. You're not going to either have seen a lot of the cards, you're not going to have played those specific solo modes, or you've played those solo modes a long time ago and you've forgotten all of it. Clearly, I imagine since the idea here is for you to be proficient in Yu-Gi-Oh, they're trying to push you to learn more. The problem with that idea is that there are 10,000 cards in Yu-Gi-Oh, and only about 3,000 that are worth knowing about, and they're not limiting themselves to those 3,000 cards that really matter. Blue Eyes White Dragon should be a card that's shown, not just random cards in solo mode questions. So my hope here is that we'll eventually just finish the proficiency exam and get to like level 9 proficiency and be done with it. And I hope they don't ever add any more to it. Inherently, the questions, when you get a question wrong, aren't giving you a hyperlink to go to that solo mode and play that solo section if you haven't played it already, or if you need to play it again. So you'd have to make a special note to back out 3 menus to find the solo mission, to do it, to learn the answer to that one question, to then go back and try and do the test again. And that's just not efficient. It's just way easier just to brute force it and guess. And that does remind me, there is one more complaint, and I'll try to stop complaining about Skyward Sword, that needs to be pointed out, in that there is an ambition there to have a fully connected streaming loading style open world. It's not really the case. There's a significant number of loads, particularly in places where you just could avoid doing that. Like, if you could, for instance, just get potions from a vendor right next to a boss fight, that would make a lot of sense. But in Skyward Sword, if you're at a boss fight and you need to get potions, you're probably going to need to go through at least 3, probably closer to 5 loading screens, because there's a loading screen out of the boss fight area, and then possibly a loading screen to get to another area to get to a statue. Once you get to a statue, you go to the sky. There's another loading screen to be in the sky, and you're flying around on the sky there. Then you have to fly to your central hub location where the only potion vendor is, and so then there's a loading screen when you fly into the central hub location. Then once you're in the central hub location, you have to walk into the bazaar where the potion vendor is, and buy the potions, which there's a lot of text on that too. That's kind of repetitive and annoying and never gets any better. And so once you then have the potions, you probably want to talk to a second character to make better, to make stronger versions of the potions, which adds more talking. After that, then you have to do everything in reverse. You have to leave the bazaar for another loading screen. You have to go to the sky and fly around for another loading screen. You have to transition to the landmass where the boss fight is for another loading screen. From that landing point in the landmass, you're probably going to have to walk through another room for another loading screen, and very possibly walk through another room for another loading screen. And it's not like the loading screens are they aren't actually screens. It's just fade to black and fade in. I will give them that, but it's not like they're fast either. It's not this instantaneous situation where it just works, and it's unnoticeable. It's very, very noticeable. And yeah, there's clearly an easier way where you should have been able to just maybe go to a statue and order some potions to be delivered to you. There is a flying robot, so it would have made a lot of sense for there to be a flying robot that would just deliver things from the potion shop and save you on all those loading screens. When you're flying around, it's a fairly slow flying around effect also, and that is, I imagine, to hide more loading. And I imagine the original version of Skyward Sword was probably hiding a lot of loading overall. But yeah, it's definitely not a good experience. And that is one thing I guess Breath of the Wild did improve upon quite a bit, is that at least the open world part of Breath of the Wild is this continuous loading section where you aren't seeing any loading screens. That is one thing they got right. You're seeing very few of them, but at the cost of having absolutely no absolutely no dungeons. It's not a worthwhile endeavor. Honestly, I probably would have liked Breath of the Wild better if it did just give me tiny little square rooms that barely had nothing going on in them. Like, just a square room where you fought enemies, and then open the gate to the next room. I would have been probably happier with that idea. But there's still the problem that there are just no items you really pick up that are important in Breath of the Wild, at least as far as I got, other than maybe some Divine Beast skills. I guess technically those might be somewhat important, but I would say Skyward Sword at least still has that traditional thing where you are getting items, and the items are acting like keys to be used as a element of getting past dungeons. And there are proper dungeon bosses. That's another thing I guess Breath of the Wild is missing, is that there really aren't any bosses because there aren't any dungeons. Yeah, you just have the same roaming robots throughout the entire game. So there definitely is a level of gimmick that I find acceptable in Zelda games, as far as having a gimmick boss with a gimmick item. Like, in fact, I would say Zelda games are kind of built around that. Having a boomerang and having a boss that can be beaten by the boomerang is kind of what you would expect and what you would want. So I guess what that leaves me with is that there are, particularly looking at the timeline, like of the 3 or 4 different timelines that exist with branching paths and splits, there are games, most of which would be like Game Boy games, that could be played by me that would be more in that traditional Zelda game, NES Zelda game style, and I almost certainly would enjoy that more if I tried to engage and play those games. But it does certainly put me in this position where future Zelda games are probably going to be like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. It'd be very weird if they tried to go back and do more of a traditional one, although not super crazy, because it does feel like there's probably 2 or 3 second-party developers that make these Zelda games for Nintendo, and I wouldn't be surprised if there is a team that has wants more of a traditional Ocarina of Time game and tries to make it more of a traditional Zelda adventure game and less of a open world collectathon RPG game. I could even see a Final Fantasy XIV type split where Nintendo gets into the mind of having a game as a service and an online game where you have something like Breath of the Wild where you just could play it forever. Although I don't think the current generation of kids are sticking to Zelda like that. They stuck to Breath of the Wild because there really weren't any other options, but I don't think they'd stick around as long as they may have stuck around for something like Minecraft, because there is no infinitely evolving world with multiple gameplay mechanics like Minecraft has. So yeah, I would... They'd have to make it a lot more interesting to try to make a Zelda game as a service that just went on forever. But I wouldn't be surprised if that was something they're thinking about. And you might have a split like that, and then you might have a team that decides to go back to the old, much more story-focused experience. I think that is a big part of my problem with Breath of the Wild 2, is that while there is story in Breath of the Wild, it was kind of hard to come by. There's just a lot of wasting time getting from point A to point B in between a story section that didn't have that big cinematic experience because there wasn't a dungeon there. So yeah, I'm rather peeved. And I'm rather peeved in that I spent the extra time playing Skyward Sword because I started a virus scan for a virus that seemingly doesn't even really exist. Because Windows Defender seemingly is an idiot and was counting uBlock Origin as a virus because it had the domain of a bad website in its block list. So all of that took me away from working on my smart on-air sign for a whole week, which is an extra vacation I probably shouldn't have taken. I did, after that, spend a little bit of time working on the instructions for my smart on-air sign instructions, which it's terrible at the moment. It's in a very bad shape, and it's not going to be in great shape either way. So I'm trying to experiment with Google Documents as far as just, can I get this in a table? Can I get this down to 3 pages? And it be decent enough. I guess inherently a step that can be taken is to just make an installer and host an installer, but I suspect that if I was to try to make my own installer, I'd have to license some program to make an installer for me. And then I'd have to host it. But that certainly would save a lot of things, is that if I just said download this program and follow the instructions on the program, and the program just clicks next, and it would just automatically download and install the latest OBS, it would automatically set up OBS WebSocket, and it would automatically install Advanced Scene Switcher as a plugin, and then automatically install the macros. Like, if you just did all of that in one fell swoop, that would eliminate easily 10 steps, 10 very small steps, and make it feel more like a product. But at a certain level, that's something where companies would in the past not even bother to pay for hosting, and you would just get this CD-ROM with your products, and here's the drivers, install it from there. But people don't even use CD-ROM, so I would have to get some incredibly small, like 2 megabyte flash drive, USB flash drive, and even then people, rightfully so, should be a little cautious around plugging in a random USB flash drive. But that's basically all I've been able to do was able to work on the instructions a little bit. Mostly it was just Breath of the Wild. I mean, not Breath of the Wild, but Skyward Sword that I've been playing for the past week. Meanwhile, there was another game that I saw or was announced, and I can't even remember what it was, but definitely caught my attention as far as, boy, would I like to be playing that game right now, or boy, was this a good time to potentially play that game. I definitely would have to give it some thought as far as what are games like Ocarina of Time that are on the PC. Like, is there something that is somewhat close to that, or has nobody had the budget or ambition to really go in that direction? What kind of Zelda-esque fantasy games or adventure games actually exist there? Like, there definitely were some games like that in the past, but they've all become very grindy and collectathon things. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the Horizon games were at one point fairly similar in kind of its feel, or somewhat similar in its feel, as far as you're going on an adventure in a weird world. But yeah, I don't have anything that I could immediately just say, yes, this feels like a Ocarina of Time game. And I think it is worth pointing out too that Ocarina of Time was too long of a game, and it's set the bar too high, and that is a significant part of the problem with it, is that it's just going to be in people's nostalgic minds forever as probably the best Zelda game ever. And I would say there's a fairly large difference between like even Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker, and I'd like to play both, but I would have to admit too that there is a pretty big difference between those two. Another annoyance of Skyward Sword, and I probably could just continuously go through and remember more annoyances, is that everybody complains about the water level in Ocarina of Time. Well, there's a whole point in Skyward Sword where an entire forest gets flooded, and it just drastically changes the way you maneuver throughout that environment. But while you're swimming, you really can't collect any of the other items. All the insects and monsters are gone because the water is flooded, and you can't swing your sword or use any other items. You can't bomb things. They are extremely on the nose as far as where you can bomb things. You'll see crumbling rocks or a giant crack that is easy to see, and there are no real secret things that I could ever find or know about. The drawing minigame on the walls is about the most secret thing, and the drawing minigame on the wall never worked for me once. So that just comes off as another failed gimmick. I'm gonna waste some cards here. Yeah, it definitely doesn't make a lot of sense to me that you would flood an area and have a whole section where you're swimming around collecting more items, which is all you could do is you're collecting these little tadpoles in the flooded forest, and the forest unfloods and you're just back to it being the way it was. Very minimal water levels if you're going to do water levels at all. Inherently, you could just, like, if you were going to make a rip-off Zelda game, first thing you would do is just establish that the character cannot swim, or whatever characters in that world cannot swim. That there's maybe poisoned waters or something, and just make it consistent throughout the entire series going forward from the first game, that all water is going to be toxic, all water is going to be poisoned. If you fall into it, you will take damage and then eventually die. And then you can use that as an excuse to just never do any water levels, which have never really worked in video games. And if anything, I think the history of people copying water levels is really an example of game developers really just copying each other and not listening to player feedback or realizing that it's just never going to work. I'm just going to activate this a second time and hope that allows it to work. So I've been playing for about an hour, so this probably should be the last game, and it should also be the last I say on Skyward Sword. I am in a weird position now where I don't really have any other games other than Pokemon Snap, so I could, if there was an emergency and I needed to play, is weird word, wanted to play Switch while the power is out or something, or if my computer was, I don't know, backing up or restoring things, I could play Pokemon Snap, but that's it. There is arguments to buy the new Super Mario RPG, since they made that game a little bit faster, a little bit easier. So yeah, there is a argument around that. And there's probably a couple other Mario type games that I could see myself buying. Metroid Prime Trilogy would be one, certainly to consider. We still aren't anywhere close to a Metroid Prime 4 being released, last I checked. I could make an argument around yeah, I could make an argument around buying Pikmin 4 or the Pikmin 1 remake and playing those. But yeah, if I'm going to be particularly picky and recognize that I don't really have a lot of time to play Nintendo games that I can't make footage around, I definitely gave a small thought as far as, could I just get on a live stream and rant? And that's effectively what I'm doing here. But could I find a more structured way of doing that and ranting about a Nintendo game and talking about a Nintendo game? There is some possibility to that. I guess I could pull up like a walkthrough and just scroll through the walkthrough and maybe open specific pictures and make a bit of a slideshow that way, and give a general concept breakdown of my experience of the game. But I think that would still be very rough. And it would be a different kind of format to be the exact opposite of doing a long play and showing all the footage, and instead it would be this review where I'm barely showing any screenshots at all, and I'm probably using other people's screenshots in the case of Nintendo Switch games to reference and talk about things, and arguably that might not be fair use to use someone else's screenshots to talk about what the screenshot depicts. But then you probably get away with it anyways. I did see this operating system called Chimera OS I wanted to talk about. So Chimera OS is an attempt to make Steam OS without really building Steam OS, which for the most part Steam OS is only built to run on the Steam Deck. So what it's really doing is it's building a Arch Linux operating system, which Steam OS is also an Arch Linux based operating system, but it's not the same. There's different people working on it, different tweaks, and it is booting directly into big picture mode on Steam and running a custom version of Proton, a forked version of Proton, which may be better, may be worse, or may just be generally different. from what you get on Steam OS. Inherently, if you were going to build a computer and put Chimera OS on it, you are rolling your own experience, where Steam Deck and Steam OS is more of a curated thing. Chimera OS is much more of that Linux feel, where you're going to have to be comfortable fiddling with your operating system, where Steam OS feels more like a polished out of the box product. Which, yeah, there can be benefits to both, but I think most people would prefer a Steam Deck and a Steam OS. Now, if you bought something that looked like a Steam Deck but was running Windows, putting Chimera OS on it might be very intelligent. And if Steam OS at some point made an installer that made it fairly easy to build a regular i86 AMD 64 style PC, just a PC with a motherboard or graphics card things, if you could install Steam OS directly onto it, you probably would rather go with that. In particular, I would say Steam OS also has a protected unwritable partitions, and so it's a little bit more difficult to tweak and change things, but it's also a little bit more protected because of that. Let's see. But some other features built into Chimera OS is that you boot into your game systems within minutes. It has a built-in web app to install and manage games from any device. It's only what you need to play games and nothing more. It's minimal. It's out of the box. You start playing right away with zero configuration for supported games. It's always up to date. Regular updates are delivering the latest drivers and software. Plus, it's fully automatic updates that run in the background without disrupting gameplay. Now, I'm not 100% sure that SteamOS actually does that. It's controller first, and you can use any controller, the Xbox, PlayStation, or Steam controllers. Plus, it has support and target support for Steam, Epic Games Store, Good Old Games, and dozens of other console platforms. The part that they are... Where is this? Not working. They have their own list here as far as what's verified, playable, and unsupported, which is their Proton DB equivalent. And then they have a list here specifically of devices that it is targeting and what will work and what won't work. Apparently fingerprint readers not working. You are definitely in a weird position here. It's like I couldn't really tell you about any of these devices in particular, which one would be good to get, which one would be bad to get. Noticeably here, there is no fingerprint reader and no TDP control for the Steam Deck itself. So you could put the Chimera OS on Steam Deck if you wanted to. I don't know if it really needs that. Yeah, I think you would definitely be in a mistaken position though to do Chimera OS on anything other than your home-built PC, or it's my turn, isn't it? Whoops, I'm about to lose here because I'm not paying enough attention. What I could see happening is you could potentially get a refurbished cheap Steam Deck, the cheapest of the ones, and then they might drop support for that in a couple of years, and then putting Chimera OS on it might make a lot of sense. In the same way that a lot of the early first generation, second generation, third generation Android phones worked a lot better if you hacked them and put a ROM on them after a few years once they stopped getting support. And a lot of them, the first generation ones, worked better if you hacked them and started getting support from the beginning. Let's see if we can. Could have done something more, and I didn't decide to do that. That was dumb. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna hope for the best here. But I need to also hurry up. This will be the last game I play. Nope, can't activate it, so I've, I think, failed miserably, or he's activating something. So when you jump over to the Chimera OS GitHub, here, there's this emu deck section. So emu deck is not officially supported by Chimera OS. Emu deck may have assumptions about running on the Steam Deck. Emu deck is one of the things you can install to install Emulation Station and RetroArch and do the emulation. And there's arguably, maybe you don't even need to install EmuDeck to do that, but there is a lot of stuff going on with Chimera OS that SteamOS can't do, as far as setting it up so that you very quickly and easily can upload ROMs to it and have a device that is pre-set up to play older games. And Chimera OS still has a Linux desktop, so you can go into desktop mode and do your word processing, do your homework. And I think in a lot of ways that is where Chimera OS has more of appeal. I wish there was more screenshots to show here. But the future, I suspect, is going to be a future where a lot of people build computers and just want to get away from Windows. Of course, people have been preaching this for decades, and nobody has ever actually succeeded in getting away from Windows or moving to Linux, which is what most of the people would like to see you go to. But yeah, with Windows 10, with Windows 11, with it just becoming more and more of this online service that people don't want to give their data to Microsoft, which, by the way, Microsoft is set, I heard, to become the biggest company once again and beat Apple. But yeah, there really isn't a great reason other than DirectX and perhaps support for the newest of the games, and maybe Microsoft Game Pass, to stick with Windows. Particularly if ProtonDB can still handle new games pretty well. 37 seconds. So yeah, we may Chimera OS might be a option that we see in the future, where people who build computers are building computers for the next generation of people who need computers, and instead of putting Windows on it, they're putting Chimera OS. Certainly Chimera OS sounds more appealing than Linux Mint, for instance, where Linux Mint is a fine Linux operating system. It's still really just trying to make an experience that feels like Windows XP, Windows 95, Windows 7. That's all it's really trying to do. It's not gaming focused by any means, which would be the one thing people still really are doing with PCs, other than word processing and web browsing. If you're just going to do web browsing, Chrome OS makes a lot of sense, but then you're perhaps too limited at that point to just browsing. And certainly Apple products do their Apple thing. Android on PCs would make a lot of sense too, but they've not really made any progress towards really porting Android to run well on PCs, and nobody has really spent any effort to make Android apps run well on PCs. It is just targeting a much smaller screen resolution and a different screen ratio, being in portrait instead of landscape for most people. Of course, if I was to start playing with Chimera OS, it would take up a lot of my time, first of all. And second of all, it might prove itself to be making a lot of promises that it just isn't really capable of delivering on. So more experimentation is needed. It's worth pointing out that the YouTuber I watched talk about this is a YouTuber who does kind of just make really short, not shallow videos. There's no in-depth experimentation and testing on it. So who knows how well it runs or not. And this YouTuber also is one of those positive YouTubers that just says everything is great and never says anything critical or negative. But yeah, they have Steam game support and then non-Steam game support for Epic Games Store, Good Old Games Flat Hub, and even allows you to install ROMs from many retro console platforms after uploading app images. Also, uploading app images is supported, though they can't guarantee compatibility of any single app image with Chimera OS environment. This is all done through a web app that allows you to remotely connect and install software to Chimera OS. You can connect to the Chimera web app via any browser on a phone or computer, navigate the library screen, and select the platform you want to install software. So it's running its own server, I would assume, and it's not, it's a local host server on port 8844. And here we can see a long list of just built-in things it can support, and probably can do even more, going up to Nintendo 64 and GameCube and Dreamcast, which is way further than what I think even a Raspberry Pi 5 could really handle. And it definitely makes more sense, I think, these days to go in that step. It depends on the age of the kid too that you're probably building this for, as far as gaming on old games. Inherently, if you have a very young kid and you want to just limit them to very specific NES games and like kid-friendly games, a Raspberry Pi 5 can be this own lockdown system, or somewhat lockdown system, where it'd be very difficult for them to find ROMs. If they tried to download ROMs online, they'd probably get a cease and desist type letter from your ISP as far as copyright infringement. So it's more of a lockdown thing, whereas I think Chimera OS is looking more towards an older age kid, your 15, 16, 17-year-olds who need a little bit more, need the flexibility to install apps, would be allowed to install apps in general, whereas Raspberry Pi might make more sense there. It's still questionable whether Steam Deck doesn't just make more sense though for kids, even though Steam Decks as hardware are probably expensive. Building a computer would be expensive too. And I think the biggest difference there is you choose Chimera OS if you're building a computer and connecting it to a monitor or TV, versus Steam OS if you're using a Steam Deck or some device that that isn't a Steam Deck but somehow could run Steam OS. And questionably, maybe even Steam OS is better than Chimera OS even for your for a built computer too. Let's see if we can find any pictures of Chimera OS instead of just talking about it. Save search off. Let's go with save search on. So yeah, you have the logo of Chimera OS. It looks like this. And then you have people putting it on Steam Decks and getting more into the modding. But here's kind of what the library looks like. Can we get into a bigger picture? And really, this is probably just Steam Picture, big picture mode anyways though, so mostly it's that. Here we can see a selection of consoles, although questionable as to why you would search by system at a certain level. At a certain level, shouldn't this just all kind of blend together and be all your games in one list? Because even on Steam, it really is that way, where there are games that are from decades or earlier and feel different. Here we can see Kodi, the media streamer, and Firefox, the web browser, and Spotify, and just in general FlatHub apps. I imagine you can install. These are more Linux demo games than games you'd actually want to play, or Linux apps. It might very well be a case too that now I'm just getting chimeras, pictures of chimeras. Might very well be a case that Chimera OS at the moment is actually too new, and this may be something that's great in a year or two. But yeah, there you have an example of what they would call chimerism in humans: one blue eye, one brown eye. But yeah, not really seeing a lot of pictures even here. Probably are some videos that we could watch, but I'm not going to watch somebody else's YouTube videos. So yeah, let me just quickly see if there's anything new on Twitter to talk about, and then we'll start going through the news. Yeah. While I'm sitting here, it is also worth pointing out that another mod, and this really is something that if I had a little bit more energy I'd rant about. Yet another mod has been released for Portal 2 called Portal Revolution. It's a fan-made mod that I think once again is going to make a fairly decent experience in Portal 2, and once again just highlight that Valve has completely dropped the ball as far as just supporting Portal 2. Even if they just said, you know what, we're just going to make spin-off games, non-canonical games around Portal 2. Feels like there should be programmers in Valve programming for games that will actually get released, instead of having programmers at Valve either wasting their talents and potentially need to just be laid off if they are wasting their talents, doing customer service for Steam, or having programmers wasting their talents by making versions of a Half-Life game that's never going to be released. But yeah, it is a shame that there are at least 3 very good fan-made Portal 2 mods that have been released now, and I'll definitely play it because I love Portal 2, but I really would like to see a canonical Portal 3 be made and be released. Just pull the trigger on it and just say, forget it. We feel we can tell that story. We can move the story forward and make a Portal 3, particularly while you still have the voice actress who plays GLaDOS still alive and available. I mean, inherently she's going to get too old and retire or die if they take too long, and then they'll just be using some kind of computer generated AI voice for GLaDOS, which would be very easy to do. Anyways, we have a GameDeveloper.com article here saying Tencent and Ubisoft are making NPCs with NVIDIA's AI-generated tools. The 2 developers have started integrating NVIDIA's AI-generated tools into their respective pipelines to help NPCs for their games. Tencent is a big company, so which games of which subsidiary is Tencent using it, I'm not sure. And is Ubisoft kind of the same problem? Most of the NPCs in Ubisoft games are kind of pointless. I don't know if AI generation is going to make it any better. This is different, I guess. This AI generated tool called ACE is different from what NVIDIA has shown before, which was the randomly assisted NPC face generator. That was Unreal Engines has a randomly assisted MetaHuman, I think is the name of that program, and they weren't selling MetaHuman, Unreal wasn't, as an AI thing, because it came out slightly before they started putting AI in front of everything. The question here is the AI tool ACE. Let's just look at it. Let's click on it and see what it does. Is it AI generating the textures and the visuals of art, if this page loads? Or is it randomly generating dialogue, or both? Let's see. The NVIDIA Avatar Cloud Engine is a suite of technologies that helps developers bring avatars to life with generative AI. AI models are designed to run in the cloud or locally on PC. Secure and consistent results. Audio to face. Interesting. So maybe you just talk and it makes a face based on how you're speaking or what you tell it to look like. NVIDIA Live Portrait. NVIDIA voice font sounds like it is them changing the voice patterns. Rivia, Nemo, and Nemo, or Riva. Right. So you put text in, or voice, or video as inputs. then you can put in a 2D avatar or 3D avatar, and then it's going to nebulously do its AI thing, and it's going to output audio, blend shapes, or video stream. So it does a little bit of everything. It's promising. Here we can see an example here, a 3D scan of a face speaking here, and then it being mapped to the mouth. It is going to definitely be a case where it's going to add details as you get more complicated systems, but then it's going to be diminishing returns. Like effectively on this case, you're talking about lip flap, and most people other than anime fans don't even know what lip flap is, let alone care about what lip flap is, in the sense that if a character starts talking and the mouth opens and closes and opens and closes and it doesn't look 100% accurate, that's probably fine. In most games, you're from first person perspective or third person perspective, so you're not even seeing your main protagonist's mouth move anyways. So it really is just going to come down to other people talking. And yes, you can have really bad lip flapping games where the mouth looks nowhere close to what is being said, but after a certain point, once it starts to look realistic enough, getting it more accurate is just wasting resources. So on like AI generated lip flap animation or face animations, that's only going to get you so far. And inherently what you're assuming here is that by scanning a real person's face, even if they are an actor, that the way they flap their lips, the way they raise their eyebrows, the way they move their face is actually better than the way an animator could do it, where animators often know you need to exaggerate the face movements so that it's more readable, so other people recognize it when they look at it, and it needs to be a little bit more cartoony to feel even natural. I would also argue that there aren't a really large amount of face actors that are around. People aren't really trying to be face actors or being trained to be face actors anyways, so you definitely are going to get a lot of deadpan stares from actors if you tried to do a 3D face scanning action. I would say, looking just at this chart, it does seem like you are adding quite a bit here still. The idea of potentially adding text or voice or video, and what they mean by voice here is what your voice sounds like. It's not a text, speech to text. You could probably do speech to text and then get text, but this still means, for the most part, you're going to need a human or some other AI driven intelligence, is what they're saying here, which artificial intelligence driven intelligence doesn't really make sense, but whatever, to make the text, to speak the voice lines, to record the video, to act in front of the video. You're still going to probably need a human for a 2D avatar image and a 3D avatar image. Now, inherently, you see how they're going to try and have some AI generate the image at some point, and then that'll be AI, and then they're going to have an AI writer writing the text and writing the dialogue, and then the video will probably get dropped. So they'll try and make this as automated as possible, and most of this is just automation. It's not really intelligence. There's not really an intelligence being guaranteed here. It's just some nebulous cloud thing. The weirder point here, though, is that there is probably some cover, and I'll wrap up on this aspect, that it's Tencent and Ubisoft being the first couple to be named and shamed for using AI generated tools, or AI generation tools might be a better word to use, because there's already been reasons to boycott Tencent and Ubisoft for a lot of reasons. Ubisoft is greedy and doesn't support its old games very well, and generally has just only focused on Assassin's Creed games and not supported a lot of its other games that it has the license to, nor has it licensed out other games to other people. Like Beyond Good and Evil 2 is never coming out. Sands of Time looks like it's never going to come out. It may come out at some point as far as a remake. And Assassin's Creed games now are nothing close to what the Assassin's Creed games were in the past. And otherwise, I don't know of any other games that Ubisoft is even releasing, but there's plenty of games Ubisoft owns. Tencent has many subsidiaries and definitely could be releasing more games and just being a better steward of video games in general, in my opinion. One of the subsidiaries, Shift Up, that was the maker of my previously favorite mobile game, it's now shut down, Destiny Child. Well, Shift Up has another game called Nike Goddess of Victory, which I tried and didn't like. Well, a story a few weeks ago came out, and I've kept forgetting to mention it, where they had to come out and apologize for stealing the art of someone else. So you have Nike Goddess of Victory as a gacha game where they come out with anime waifu girls, and in less than 2 years of it being out, they've already been caught stealing other people's creations, which, yeah, that maybe is Tencent's influence. Maybe it has nothing to do with Tencent buying a significant share of Shift Up, but it definitely is a black eye on a company that doesn't need it, because Stellar Blade is also Shift Up's game and it's coming out, and if all of a sudden we start to see arts being stolen from Stellar Blade, stolen art in Stellar Blade, that's going to be yet another bad turn of events. Apparently, the deadline approaches for submissions for the Game Maker's Sketchbook at GDC 2024. GameDeveloper.com is a sister company to GDC, so Game Developer Conference is going to happen, and they're having people submit artwork for some kind of sketchbooks, which is an interesting idea, certainly, as far as game artists helping them have a reason to build up and update their portfolio and show their art and compare their art to other game artists in the industry. I wonder what the licenses and copyrights go on that, if this sketchbook is something that is shown on a slideshow at the conference, or is it put on a website, or is it actually a sketchbook that they're going to print and sell? Sketchbooks from specific game artists would be an interesting thing to have websites for, and there is definitely a difficult task there to try and find artists that make video games and follow them on some kind of Instagram type website, or I don't know what else would be the right website. DeviantArt might be a place, but probably not. Yeah, there's really not a good place to go where, if you were going to just try and follow game artists and see what they've actually created. And inherently that gets back to the crediting problem, in that you may see credits at the end of the game, but you really don't know what those people worked on or what you can say they've done. They don't have good portfolios available that I could find. So yeah, if I was going to try and make a website like Giant Bomb, at some point with a big old wiki. I think focusing a lot more on credits, focusing a lot more on individual people, making it much closer to something like LinkedIn for video gamers, something that you would expect GameDeveloper.com might be, but it doesn't really seem like GameDeveloper.com actually is that, would make a lot of sense overall. And I definitely would have to bend over backwards and spend all my time making sure I got people credited correctly and get their employment history correctly, and fighting with people to get accurate information as far as are they actually even employed there, or what did they actually work on. And IMDb, frankly, is what it should be. It should be something closer to IMDb where you can click on an actor and see the other projects they worked on for video games, and that just doesn't, I think, exist. If it does exist, I've never heard of it. Netflix is exploring in-game ads and other revenue options for game services, which tells me Netflix thinks it's not making enough money. NCSoft has let a player-made City of Heroes server go live by giving it a limited time license. City of Heroes private Homecoming server has been granted a full-on license to keep its superhero MMO unofficially alive, which to me this sounds like they had to go through some lawyers just to make it all legal, and then they gave them a license. Maybe they had to actually pay for the license somewhat too, who knows. Let's see, we've got the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences doing DICE 2024 registration. So we're getting the beginnings of setups for new events. CES is, I believe, next week, and we'll get a bunch of announcements for like computer hardware, which at that point something big might happen, but probably not. What could be the case is that if anybody was going to do anything, it would be a bunch of Steam Deck competitors at CES, or a new Steam Deck coming out at CES, and that wouldn't really make a lot of sense. Now kind of would be the time though to sneak out the new Steam Deck, is right after Christmas has happened, but it's too early since they just came out with the OLED version. They'd have to come out with something called like a Steam Deck XL that is just a larger model with larger screen and bigger hand grips for big fat people, basically. Large people, maybe not fat. I guess I was probably following this just because of the Game Maker sketchbook. Seems like they have several different categories they're trying to fill in as far as storyboards, impact, curiosities, character arc, iconography, and environmental art. Impact seems like it is a odd category, with curiosities being odd too. The rest of these feel like more hard sciences, where this seems to be more of nebulous groups that you could submit your art for. Marvel Snap got $100 million in funding for I believe it was Stage B fundraising is what I think it was called. So Second Dinner will still operate independently, but now it has $100 million for years of development, plus it's working on a new IP, but it's been promising. Marvel Second Dinner has been promising a new IP. Basically, is from day one that they released and announced Marvel Snap. So they've always kind of been in that category of announcing that this wasn't the only game they planned on making, and so nothing's really changed. The investment is from ByteDance, the owner of TikTok. Well, no. They found new investment after TikTok owner ByteDance dropped the game's former publisher, Newverse. So they lost Newverse. So Griffin Game Partners will invest $100 million in Second Dinner. It previously funded companies like Discord, Frost Giant Games, and mobile marketing platform AppLovin. Second Dinner, quote, will continue to operate independently. Notably, though, the Ben Brode and Hamilton Chu left Blizzard Entertainment in 2018 after developing Hearthstone, or being part of the development of Hearthstone, and there's no indication at all with this new investment that they have any decision or opinion that they would want to go back and work with Activision Blizzard now that it's owned with Microsoft and get back to Hearthstone. Even if Ben Brode did go back to even if both these people did go back to Activision Blizzard and worked on Hearthstone, I don't think it would revitalize Hearthstone and make it amazing, unless Hearthstone just became this free-to-play game that was always on Game Pass, always on consoles, which it definitely could become that. Hearthstone would make a lot of sense. Hearthstone and Overwatch are two games that would make a lot more sense if they were free to play and always available on Xbox and Microsoft Game Pass. But yeah, I could see Game Pass in the case of Hearthstone giving you free packets like every month if you had like Game Pass Pro, Premium, or whatever the high level is there, and that would bring you back to Marvel Snap. But even if these two did go back to Hearthstone, I think what they've shown they can do with Marvel Snap and the way they're thinking and the way they're creating right now only highlights that they would be a hindrance, not a help, if they went back to Hearthstone, because Marvel Snap is just not a good card game. It is far too experimental, and on that I would have to really question whether they really justified getting $100 million in funding. We also had this from GameDeveloper.com. Like, even some of the YouTubers that I know really loved Marvel Snap, and I've heard this from multiple people who really loved Marvel Snap. They all say you get to a point in the game where you just lose interest because there's nothing more to do. There are no randomization on the cards or options. It just saturates your attention far too quickly. Here's an example from Video Games Chronicle of a headline that really doesn't tell you much and is basically not news. They're clearly still struggling to find any news in this early 2024. The Baldur's Gate 3 director says he's worked out the first act of his next project, but we have no idea what his next project is at all. So, I mean, how is this really news? It's like somebody saying they wrote the first chapter of their next book. Well, how many times could you potentially rewrite the first chapter of your next book? Hundreds, millions of times? You could rewrite the first chapter of a book almost every day for the rest of your life, and it just wouldn't mean anything at all. So, incredibly unactionable. Why is this picture so blurry? Oh, there it is. Took a while to load. You also have some weirdness in the spiked collar. It seems like at any point, if your head got whiplash, you'd just stab yourself in the neck. That makes no sense at all as to why you would have a collar like that unless it was forced upon you. But even then, the spikes are kind of too far away if you're putting a spike collar on somebody. It, I guess, looks maybe intimidating a little bit, but only a little. But it's fantasy, and fantasy armor can be crazy and wild. But yeah, that's basically not news. Now, I could argue that this is also not news just because of the price point. Apple's $3,500 Vision Pro headset launches in the US in February. This mixed reality headset is expected to arrive in more countries later this year. It is actionable if you have $3,500 to spare. It does speak to Apple maybe missing the mark on price range, but at least experimenting and targeting on VR and mixed reality, but it is also very possibly just the last remnant of augmented reality and virtual reality concepts, because Microsoft has abandoned this project and that concept too, and that would only really leave Facebook, which has wasted a ton of money trying to do metaverse and mixed reality. I don't think Valve is really working on any more VR stuff, and I don't think anybody else is really working on VR. Undoubtedly, augmented reality and virtual reality will come back again in another 5 years, in another 10 years. It just keeps coming back in cycles, and it never makes any sense. The products inherently are limited by the technology. You have either a goofy swim goggles in this case, or you have giant headsets or giant glasses. It's just too big for what it's trying to do, and too cumbersome. I think many people who use glasses and wear glasses, and you see this with kids that are given glasses all the time, find even glasses to be cumbersome. It's just not the natural state that you want something hanging on your face, even for a short period of time, even if it does improve your eyesight. And so yeah, you look at the percentage of kids who should be wearing glasses and aren't wearing glasses because of that, and you will see the percentage almost to the same number of people who will never embrace VR or augmented reality devices. Sure, if you're blind and you have to wear something to see, you'll do it if you're absolutely blind, but you won't even really like it then. If we got the technology down to the point where it was very, very small and uncumbersome, maybe people would do that. People generally don't have a problem with putting on sunglasses every now and then, but people don't like just having to wear see-through glasses, and that means probably is because sunglasses will literally blind you if you're not wearing them. So until you get to a scenario similar to the sun blinding you, people don't want to wear glasses. Where there's a decent chance we'll get interactive brain chips that work faster than we would get VR. And at that point, if we just had a port in the side of our neck and we plugged in a USB cord, and then we could see things and smell things and taste things that way, just directly communicating with our brain, then you would have surpassed virtual reality and augmented reality for some new human computer interface. And yeah, it's just as likely that would happen before VR or AR or augmented. Of course, you'll have some Apple fanboys that buy this, undoubtedly, and they'll play with it a couple times and then they'll stop using it, and then you will probably see these things go on clearance very quickly or be hoarded for parts to repair them when inevitably Apple stops making the product, and then you need spare parts from other people. GameDeveloper.com has perhaps more of an editorial story here, why this dev made a spiritual successor to the infamous CDI Zelda games. I guess for old Zelda games, I don't really consider the CDI games to be really really canon. Not something I really would bother to play, because it's not like they play well either. So, but also the reason why this developer made a spiritual sequel to the CDI Zelda games is because their game wouldn't have gotten any attention. It's pretty obvious. Even here, you have to scroll down past the picture just to get the name of the company, CDI, and the name of the game, Azerati, the Jewel of Faramore, which, let's see if we can click on that and if that'll take us to Steam or what. Weirdly, I'm having pages not really want to load. Let's see. Steam is listed, but is there a link to get to Steam from here? No. So yeah, I'd say it's not even really a good website here as far as promoting your game, in that there's no links. It's not out yet, so unless its release date has changed, so there wouldn't be any reviews, and that was what I was looking for. This is probably a good example too of a bad website. I've never been to this website before. I'm not blocking any content as far as I know. Maybe some ads are being blocked by uBlock Origin, but for somebody trying to promote your game, maybe we don't need social media things too, which are just pictures of chains, which I don't know what that even goes to. Maybe game developer, maybe something else. Here you've got the old Twitter icons still, which that's going to consistently be a case. But then you're only really showing 5 screenshots, and showing 5 small paragraphs next to the screenshots. And then there's some questions. Yeah, for a video game, I would like some more details, particularly on the developer's website. I could see it being less detailed on a Steam page, but really there's no reason that there aren't just paragraphs of explanation or description of a game on a Steam page. Inherently, Steam pages could have a whole spoiler section where the entirety of events would be laid out in a game. I could see that being the case, particularly if you're concerned about adult content in a video game, but I could just also see it being a good way to have a IMDb style Wikipedia that here is your full synopsis of what happens in a video game, in the same way that there's, I'm sure, plenty of websites that will give you full synopsises of what happens in a movie and spoil that. Apparently Final Fantasy XIV, which I believe is the online MMO, has announced Pictomancer job unveiled at a fan fest. Now, the fact that MMOs have jobs is pretty normal, but seeing it in the abstract in a headline does kind of feel funny, that the thing you're announcing about your game to make it more fun is you've introduced a job that can be done in the game. But MMOs are pretty grindy, and you are doing jobs almost always. You're either hunting monsters as a monster hunter job, or you're collecting flowers as a flower picker, or something like that. But yeah, I imagine that will make fans of people who play Final Fantasy XIV happy that there's more to do, but that's certainly not particularly impressive to me from the outside, just having this one screenshot. It might change the balance of how you play in the MMO, but I never really understood MMOs concepts anyways, because it really is just to make you grind and continue playing, and you have to find some really special way to make that entertaining and consistent, for me at least. Then Video Games Chronicle has the same article here, and Netflix is reportedly exploring adding in-game ads to its gaming service. I don't know if this is supposed to be a joke or not, but it's from Video Games Chronicles. I almost thought this was going to be a parody headline. A former Activision exec has now accused Activision of discriminating against, quote, old white guys. So, I mean, they really can't get it one way or the other, and I guess inherently this is the danger of settling one discrimination claim, which was probably true since they settled it, or it was just financially intelligent to pay them off. But once you settled one discrimination claim against, I think, women and minorities, now you've got what was at one point perhaps the majority, although in fairness in the United States the breakup is going to very quickly in the next decade or two become a case where there are slightly more minorities combined, people of different races, cultures, creeds, than your standard Judeo-Christian white male in the United States, old white guys. But yeah, individually still, I think white guys and white people in general will still be the majority for a while. But the makeup of the United States is slowly changing. Arguably, nobody is 100% pure, or ever was, but and thinking in those terms is something that really should go away. But apparently, outgoing Bobby Kotick is alleged of making an ageist comment during a leadership meeting, so you say. So yeah, he's leaving. He doesn't care. This executive was laid off as part of a restructuring plan from the company last year. Quote, there are too many old white guys at the company, which I guess maybe you could say that is discrimination. Maybe you don't. Inherently, I would assume, and this is a big assumption on my part, that if you were going to make a discrimination complaint, you're going to have to say that specific actions were taken against you. So somebody saying there are too many old white guys is probably not really creating an act of discrimination there. They're probably just or an ageist statement or anything like that. It's maybe a hostile work environment, and so maybe you could say, well, you've created a hostile work environment by saying that. I think you probably have a very good argument to make that. But the fact that he was laid off might give evidence that what he said was true. But he was also upper management, and I think most people probably would look at the buildup of Activision Blizzard and say, you know what, there are too many upper management people, and some of it should be restructured and laid off, and there probably are too many old white guys. There's a real danger here, because I can imagine every single minority agreeing with Bobby Kotick in this one rare instance and saying that there are too many old white guys in the upper management of Activision Blizzard. Particularly for a video game company. Bobby Kotick himself is an old white guy. And yeah, he's not making decisions in a way that would make good video games for your average gamer. If your average gamer is a 35-year-old white male, which is generally what I've heard it is, the most common gamer. So yeah, and you can't really have it both ways. It's going to come down to a point where, and honestly it probably should be this way in management anyways, where all meetings are scripted and nothing new is said, no questions are taken, and nothing is ever said. There is this inherent problem now where anything and everything said in the meeting is being used as leverage against each other to potentially sue somebody later. Maybe it's always been that way, but it definitely seems like that's the case. And I can't 100% blame somebody for being laid off and then being pissed off and making a claim that might be investigated and proven to be unsubstantial. Inherently, even upper managers have dirt files made on them so that they can lay a ground to lay people off or fire people. This person was laid off, so you really don't have to fire them for cause. And if they weren't individually laid off, if they were laid off in a group, it's going to be hard to make a claim that they were specifically targeted. And yeah, I just don't think most people want to hear the argument that old white guys are going to get special protection, when so many other people who aren't old white guys aren't going to get special protection from discrimination. Inherently, I think this also highlights just the mess of the workforce environment of capitalism in general. It's just a huge mess, and people having to have jobs, people having bosses that are not trained or properly qualified to be bosses, bosses being able to say and do basically anything they want and have massive amounts of influence and power over other people. It just shifts a power dynamic that really should only be in the hands of the government into individual capitalists, oligarchs, which I would definitely say Bobby Kotick is at least an aspiring oligarch. Whereas if you were, and this is basically communism, and communism has never proven to work, but if you were assigned a job or applied for a job and the government gave you the job, and then the government said this person is under our protection and under our observation, so a inefficient government saying, well, we're not going to fire somebody unless they're just absolutely terrible, you probably would have more consistent of an experience, maybe not that much better. Arguably, this is where unions would be helpful, but unions still wouldn't be helpful in this case because that guy was upper management, and a union's not going to protect an upper management employee unless something really weird was going on. This is perhaps a case where if you are given a manager position, you definitely should be contracted to, and there's a lot of middle management and lower management that isn't in that case. If that person had been laid off and had a golden parachute, which is generally frowned upon, and being laid off wouldn't have been that big of a deal. But yeah, this is definitely a complaint that's gonna, I think, fall on deaf ears, because I think most people would agree that there probably are too many old white guys at Activision Blizzard, and my personal opinion is that there's definitely too many managers and needs to just be major restructuring at Activision Blizzard now that it's owned by Microsoft. I think we'll see some of that happen. I also think that that an overall restructuring of Microsoft and Xbox's subsidiaries makes a lot of sense too. I'll even go out of the way to say there's probably too many old white guys in most of the subsidiaries of Microsoft companies. ZeniMax, Double Fine, and yeah, I imagine 343, too many old white guys. Inherently in the game industry, there's too many white guys in general. That's just statistically provable, that there's too many males and too many white males in the video game industry. There isn't that many old people, though, so there is an argument to say that there's ageism. There's obvious ageism in the video game industry, generally speaking. Otherwise, we would have 45, 50, 60, 75-year-old people who have been working at video game companies, still working at video game companies and being fairly successful. And the only examples you really have of people that old are Japanese people like Shigeru Miyamoto, who made Mario games, working at a Japanese company that is probably union and keeping him employed. Plus, from a Japanese mentality, you would work at the same company for your entire working career, and they would keep older people. But as far as Western companies, no. Like, you have a couple of people, Peter Molyneux owning his company, and yeah, not too many other people. And even Peter Molyneux's not that old. We really should have people who are in their 60s and 70s and 80s at this point. People who worked at Atari. And we should see older people even making second careers and going into video game development. Let's see. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle also says Nick Offerman's Bill headlines 8 Creative Arts Emmy wins for The Last of Us, which at a certain level I find this kind of irritating, because it kind of highlights that the artistic acclaim that The Last of Us TV show has mostly gotten from, or side characters in an episode that really is not in the same level. It's not really in the video game, or it was expanded upon based on what is said in the video game. So this is a way in which they're giving a bunch of Emmys to Bill Offerman, who maybe did a better job acting compared to the main characters in the Last of Us TV show, which is very believable. But it's also a way of them giving awards to the parts they liked, the gay romance part of the Last of Us TV show, and ignoring all the parts that would be based around the video game, which just increasingly highlights how, if you convert video games to what I feel is the lesser media, as like TV, you're just selling your soul as a video game out to get awards from the Emmys, which don't really matter. See, The Bear and Netflix's Wednesday also apparently won some Emmys, but yeah, I don't really put a lot of value. Well, I don't really put a lot of value on the Emmys. But yeah, there's, unless The Last of Us in particular won like an overall award, and I only know if the Emmys even do an overall award, it now feels like they've just picked something not in the video games and given awards to it, which means that there's a decent chance we're now going to, if a Last of Us 3 gets made, it's going to heavily focus on the characters from this episode, this one, or maybe it was 2 episodes from the TV show, and then The Last of Us itself is just going to be a completely different experience, which, I mean, even that may not be that bad for Last of Us 3, because following Ellie some more doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm not 100% sure here. I guess those probably are the right shells for this gun. It seems like that the barrel here is rather thin. I don't know anything about guns. This looks like it's a pump action shotgun, which I would assume means you're feeding bullets into this lower tube. Anyways, moving on. Yeah, it's just going to be a lot of compromises, I think, if you take your video game to movies, if you take your video game to TV. It can be its own side thing, but I feel like it's just going to influence game developers to stop being game developers, and the video games themselves are going to be worse. Moving on, the Pokemon Company has donated 50 million Japanese yen, I guess is what that is, to support earthquake victims. This is a 7.6 magnitude earthquake struck Japan on New Year's Day. So it was a really big earthquake. 50 million yen is about $345,000, which perhaps is not that much. I imagine a lot of other people are donating things also, or will donate things also, although a lot of Japanese companies probably were somewhat influenced or affected by the earthquakes themselves. So yeah, I'd also argue maybe the Pokemon Company doesn't really have that much money. $300,000 might very well pay for a couple more months of development of the next Pokemon game, which almost certainly the next Pokemon game could do with having a couple more months of development. Of course, that is a really stupid thing to say that the money is better spent making video games than giving it to support earthquake victims. That's just an asinine backwards way of thinking, but it is certainly something people will say. You never know when you donate to charities in general, whether it's a big company donating or somebody else, whether the money really gets into the right hands, but you have to try at least. So I'd definitely say the Pokemon Company is doing the right thing by donating money, and it doesn't seem like they're trying to get too much of a press bump from it, nor do I think they will get a big press bump from it, because I don't think it's that much money, and I don't think it's even going to be particularly that helpful. The question I guess to ask would be, is it better perhaps to donate $50 million, or would it be better for Pokemon Company to donate Pokemon merchandise and Pokemon games in general? Because I could see there being a lot of child victims, and I could see them just giving away Shield and Sword, the latest Pokemon games. If you could give those games into the hands of kids as a day after an earthquake or so, that would help keep them distracted and be very helpful in general. If you could give stuffed Pokemon characters and things that maybe were damaged or needed replacing, that could be very helpful too. And I imagine Pokemon Company, even though they probably license out the development of a lot of the stuffed animal Pokemons, they could probably contact those people and say, hey, you've got, I imagine, a lot of stock in warehouses that you're having to pay every month to hold on to. Let's clear out that inventory and write it off as a tax write-off as far as a deduction, and look like we're the good guys by giving away old stock that we don't even want around. We don't want to pay for the warehouses. Now, that assumes that the warehouses aren't also destroyed in the earthquake. Otherwise, you could just write it off as a loss that way. And then our final big story for today is that an acclaimed, quote-unquote acclaimed Xbox game will go multi-platform this year. It's been claimed. The title was reportedly in the Game of the Year conversation in the year it was released. This is, again, a great example of a headline that means absolutely nothing. Almost every single game is critically acclaimed by somebody. So it could be anything. They're not even really telling you what year. So you could, at best, act on this information by going through every single Xbox game that is not multi-platform now and looking at all of them and considering any of them that were in the Game of the Year conversation. This feels like something like Jeff Grubb would report on, where there's just no real evidence. But apparently it's the Nate and Hate podcast, which I've never even heard of. The Nate the Hate podcast is. So how credible should I really take any of this? I would say not credible at all. And if your source is they say this show often breaks stories involving the game industry. I've never even heard of them, so obviously not breaking stories that often. Alright. And I didn't really look at all the games from the last stream, so this is a case where I really need to burn through all the old games from last stream, and probably should have just skipped it overall. We're already going very late. I'll give this one a chance so we can just see if we can burn through this fairly quickly. I guess I've gotten the system done pretty well. But wow, it says it's an official Micro Machines game, but the screenshots are pretty awful. It looks like a mobile game that's been ported. Yeah, for the most part, I do think I've gotten it down to the middle mouse button closing tabs in the right direction and opening tabs in the right direction. I do think I probably could switch everything backwards, but it also would just confuse everything if I did it that way. So I think I'll probably just leave it as it is, which has me starting on the right and moving to the left. But yeah, it might also be a case that nothing is fixed and I just have not been focusing on that problem because there's been so many other broken macro things. The point of making all the macros is to automate and make everything work. I'm going to give this a chance, but it's probably garbage. Yeah, everything was supposed to be automated. Everything was supposed to be easy and efficient, and more often than not, you get just 4 or 5 weeks of easy and efficient automation, and then something stops working, and then you're back to spending an extra day fixing macros. I do think I've probably completely dropped the ball as far as posting and scheduling YouTube shorts. And so at some point I also need to get that going, because I was having some level of success with YouTube shorts, I feel like. And yeah, I'm creating a bad situation where if I stop making YouTube shorts and then I stop getting views, I won't be 100% certain that I'm not getting views because it's just January and people are going back to school and all of that, and going back to work. There is an element here where I do make probably some false assumptions that the school age kids are watching my YouTube channel at all, when more than likely it's either college age kids or people going to work. This game Maze, I'm pretty sure there's been at least 2 or 3 games called just Maze on Steam. That's another thing that potentially should cause a red flag at Valve, is if you have a game that has the exact same name or a very similar name to an already existing game. But that can't be the sole rule, is that you can't name a game the same name, otherwise somebody's going to make cheap asset flip games and take up all the good names. Inherently, though, we don't see a game called Silent Hill coming out on Steam every couple of months. So clearly there is some level of curation happening here. Looks like we're back to the adult games that have been slightly censored not being in the adult section. Which I guess every time we see one of those, that does at least indicate that there probably are some adult games being released in the adult section. I definitely think Valve potentially, if they know your birth date from a credit card, the real birth date, that they probably should email people and say, hey, you're over 18 now in your region, would you like to turn on the adult content section? Which, that is an interesting thought, certainly. If, say, Amazon.com, it would have to be a website that sells like videos and books and things that are not adult. But if Amazon.com emailed every 18-year-old on their birthday, do you want the adult section enabled, how would people react to that? I imagine there'd be a public outcry. But it kind of would make sense to advertise in that way. I guess the general assumption is that people assume that people know that there is adult content available for purchase on Amazon. I assume there's adult content for purchase on Amazon. Almost certainly there is. I wouldn't really go to Amazon to buy porn videos or sex toys or things like that. Although buying sex toys from Amazon might be safer than, say, Adam and Eve. No. Depends on whether you want to get a quality product or whether you want to get a cheap Chinese garbage, potentially dangerous product. I guess I'm going to give this a chance. But yeah, there is kind of in my mind an odd difference with Steam, because Steam hides their adult content so well. Maybe there's searches that should pop up, bring a pop-up to say, hey, your current preferences are filtering out adult content. It kind of does say that, but only if you're searching a game in a search box. 90% of people, I imagine, get to pages like this from direct links, and they're not going from the main store page or from a search result. And so when it's recommending similar games down here, there probably should be something that says recommendations are being filtered based on your adult preferences. When it says it's a game relevant to you. Although, arguably, I could say the entirety of Steam's pages probably could use a rethink and a refresh. I don't know what you could do better, but there is a lot of text on these pages, and they are mostly bits of information that I would skip over and ignore. Here you have a Western visual novel. I'd almost say yes to it, but I feel like the face animation and this kind of hand-painted pastel art style loses a little too much detail. Plus, in fairness, I'm at the point where I really only want to suggest some of the best of the best. Should I make YouTube shorts with bad words in it? No. But I will put it on the follow list. Yeah, I'm still trying to be incredibly cautious around YouTube, so they don't get pissed off at me and delete my account once again. I put a New Year's meme on my personal Facebook where somebody writing on a blackboard 100 times, "I will back up my data this year, I will back up my data this year." And that definitely is the thought I would like to achieve this year too, is to back up my YouTube channel if there's any hope or chance of that. So I guess this is a Five Nights at Freddy's ripoff. Yeah, it'd take me a lot of work though. I did find on Amazon, speaking of shopping on Amazon, a Tuya Smart security camera in VR, which 6 months ago I was looking for that and they didn't have any. So where smart devices are in kind of this weird point, we'll know more as far as what gets announced at CES next week, but Matter as a standard really hasn't worked, and so this will just be faultless cleanup. Since Matter hasn't come out all guns blazing, there is perhaps a reversion now as far as whether does this have in-app purchases? Yes, it does, so I'm gonna say no to it. There's this reversion now where people just don't know what standard to use, whether they should try to use Thread but not use the Matter interface above Thread, or whether they should just make their own apps and their own connectivity standards, go and individually create things. Tuya has its own app that most Chinese commoditized cheap smart products will use. It's also called Smart Life, which is hard to search for, so TUYA is just easier. I'm gonna say no to this one. And we can say no to this one. Now I'm just cleaning up my follow list of older games. But yeah, having an older security system and wanting to upgrade it to a smart interface like Tuya could work very well. But there is also a high chance that the programming and the setup on it can be a nightmare and it just won't work at all. But I am pleasantly surprised to find that I can find one. I need to pull the trigger on that at some point, but not anytime soon. I could also potentially wait a year or two and stick with what I've got that isn't integrated into a smart home. My biggest problem right now with Tuya is that it doesn't work with the Chromecast. as an Android app, and I really wish it would work with Chromecast because that would add a lot more value to it. Certainly, if motion is detected at specific security cameras and then that pops up a notification or brings up a video feed at specific spots, that's way more helpful. Most security camera NVRs, DVRs, basically network video recorders, are designed to have a dedicated monitor connected to them at all time, and you would just be staring at the monitor all the time, and that's not really realistic for a home. It's realistic if you have a security guard who's doing nothing else than staring at the cameras. Who knows if the security guards really are staring at the cameras ever. So then you create a situation where nobody is ever looking at the footage until something already happens, which is typically what happens for home security cameras. But that can give you some level of comfort or protection, or at least insurance coverage. Yep. And still doesn't seem like too much is topped as far as the top 10 or 20 games. And it still seems like mostly things are going downward, other than Baldur's Gate 3, which is going upward. So clearly a lot of people got Baldur's Gate 3 for Christmas. The finals down here is really low. Elden Ring is popping up. Maybe some people got Elden Ring. But I would say overall it still seems like it's mostly a trend downward, with fewer and fewer people playing. And there's no sales at this point, no new games anytime soon to promote buying a new game. What's this one? Animal Shelter Simulator. Yeah, I haven't checked the refurb to see if there's any refurbs for the Steam Deck directly from Steam. It seems like most of the refurbs probably went through GameStop, and I would say it's probably slightly more dangerous to buy a refurb at GameStop than it is to buy a refurb from Valve directly, because a refurb at GameStop may not be as well refurbished, although it's very possible it's done by the same people and it's not really that big of a difference. Anyways, that will bring us to video game news, and I don't know why my auto blur would activate at that point. I don't know why I have the auto blur enabled anyways. So, Video Games Chronicle articles, we've mostly talked about all of these, I think. EA Sports Football Club lead UK to strong December game sales, which, yeah, this is an article we'd already pretty much talked about as far as the top 10 digital and physical sales in the UK for December. EA Sports Football Club FC24. Then Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, which clearly, regardless of people loving to complain about Call of Duty, they still play it like crazy and buy it. Hogwarts Legacy, Mario Wonder taking the 4th spot, that's pretty high. GTA getting good sales considering there's nothing really new from GTA 5. Spider-Man 2, Mario Kart 8 still getting very high sales. Avatar Frontiers of Pandora selling pretty well, despite it being a kind of weird game. And then Red Dead Redemption getting a boost for the same reason GTA 5 is getting a boost, in that they announced GTA 6, and then Switch Sports taking the 10th spot, which around Christmas it would make a lot of sense, certainly, for new people to get Switch Sports. Let's see. The Last of Us was completely snubbed at the Golden Globes, in contrast to the Emmys, as Succession swept. Which, yeah. That's generally what I expected would happen, is that anything based off a video game would be looked down upon, and half the people wouldn't even bother to watch it, let alone vote for it. But yeah, no surprise there. You do create this problem, though, that when you have a young female actress as one of the main protagonists of a TV show, they're not going to want to give her an award for anything unless she's getting an award for being a new actress or actor, because most of these award scenarios, award shows will not give awards to people until they've succeeded for a much longer time, almost their entire lifetime, and made several successful movies. Very often it's argued that the winner of a lot of awards didn't win for their most recent performance, but won just for their combined success over their entire career, or won for their second to most recent performance. But yeah, there's also saying something that I can't name this female actress, nor can I name the person who plays Joel in the yeah, I guess it's Pedro Pascal is best leading actor and actress in the drama series, and Bella Ramsey, I imagine, is this girl. But yeah, those aren't names that jump directly to my mind. Of course, I also didn't watch The Last of Us TV show because it was on HBO, and I wouldn't have watched it anyways because I haven't played The Last of Us games, because I don't own them. I don't think they're all on PC. Let's see if there's any other news that we need to talk about. We talked about in the last stream that Platinum Games is ending World of Demons. There's been no update on why. And then Baldur's Gate 3 dev was looking into Xbox players being banned for recording explicit seasons. And there's been no update on explicit scenes, and no update on that story either. And that is consistently a problem, certainly for most video game journalists, as they don't ever update with any new information or follow up on stories or get any real conclusion to a story. I was, and still am, assuming that this is a case where people were recording it for their private use, and then it was getting scanned and banning the people. But whatever service they're using, probably whatever Xbox uses to record clips, probably just isn't designed correctly. Like, there needs to be a system there where something gets detected as being, this is mature content, therefore it can't be shared publicly, which is the appropriate response, not completely banning somebody. Maybe you ban somebody if they figure out some way to upload a ton of videos of explicit content, and they're I don't know, but even that seems ridiculous on the scale. If you just made everything private, that would be fine. Like, I imagine there's a lot of, let's call them younger male characters who own an Xbox and use that to stream their video, and they use that to watch Blu-rays, and it would make some sense that they would just want to have their collection of adult content also on their Xbox as their home media streaming device, which is what they were trying to sell the Xbox One as back in the day anyways. It's like they're that would make a lot of sense. I guess the question here is, if you had a bunch of videos plugged into a hard drive, plugged into an Xbox Series X, can you watch those videos? Will those videos be scanned? Can you record explicit game content to that hard drive? But yeah, again, no follow-up. That'll bring us to the Gemetsu articles. Cult of the Lamb Sins of the Flesh update launches January 16th. Do we have a Steam link to this update? No, it's just an update to the game. And over 3.5 million copies have been sold. I feel like Cult of the Lamb as a game is probably something I should try. As a fan of Binding of Isaac, it definitely feels like it's similar in visual concept, somewhat similar, although maybe a little bit softer. See, Zhuan Yuan Sword, The Gate of Firmament, is coming to PS5 in 2024. Is that in English though? It says it supports English, and it's mostly positive. Here you can see on Steam it's from 2016. But it definitely feels like it's a little too Chinese for me, or at least a little too traditional Asian for me. A epic oriental, I don't think you're supposed to use that word anymore. Maybe it was okay in 2016 RPG series. Guess I'll give this a follow. That is an example of a game that's gaining maybe a little bit of relevance by getting released to a new console. Richmond 11 is coming to the PS4 and 5 and Xbox One and Series in March. I feel like we're gonna fairly quickly at the beginning of this year start to see only PS5 releases and only Xbox Series releases. But that does highlight where the modern consoles with the PS5 and Xbox Series could, instead of releasing a new version, they could just try to build sales by not supporting the old versions, to have, although that's going to create some negative backlash, almost certainly. Let's see, Haku Oki Chronicles of the Wind and Blossom has been announced for Switch. Let's see, what kind of game is it? It's a young maiden otome visual novel. Okay. The post-apocalyptic boy meets girl visual novel called Memento Memoria, The Abandoned Neverland, is coming to PS4 and Switch this summer in Japan. That is way too long of a title. It could have just been Memento Mori. The Abandoned Neverland is coming to PS4, Switch this summer in Japan. Let's see, this is also on Steam, but does not support English. Let's see, Final Fantasy XIV Dawn Trail expansion, female Hrothgar race, Pictomancer job, and more was announced. So, female cat. Pictomancers. Let's see if any of this catches my attention at all. If anything, this just feels like this is yet another example of where Final Fantasy XIV and Final Fantasy should be compared to Final Fantasy XVI, and where it was just not really well received, and there just wasn't a lot of meat on the bone of Final Fantasy XVI. Arguably, they're making too many Final Fantasy games too fast, but also they probably should lock in that Final Fantasy going forward should be something that feels like Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy XIV. It shouldn't feel anything like a medieval fantasy game. That should have just a different title on it. It shouldn't really feel like Final Fantasy 1 or 2, some of the early NES top-down RPG games. There needs to be some real tough questions as far as, does a game need to be in the Final Fantasy universe, or should it be in its own separate universe? That probably should have happened years ago. Also, in that Final Fantasy should be one thing and one thing only, and then there should be something else that Square Enix releases that's not under the label of Final Fantasy. Tokyo Underground Killer has a Shinjuku Hub trailer. I guess this is some kind of PC game. First person action game. First I've heard of it. It is coming out in 2024. Yeah, visually it's not particularly that impressive, so I wouldn't be surprised if I just ignored it completely and moved on. Let's see, Bushido Road Games announced visual novels from Front Ring, Cherry Muchi, Headlock coming to the Switch and PC. So 4 games from its subsidiaries coming to PC and Switch. The Blatant Lies of Lilja and Natsuka, Lilac, Dusk Index Gion, and Virtual Girl at. And they have a single sentence here really explaining what they are. I have Virtual Girl at, looks like that, and then how long would this announcement trailer be? A minute and 53 seconds? Can we tolerate something that long? Let's see if we can jump around here. It's very possibly it's just going to be a bunch of text. It doesn't start showing anything here until you just have some pencil sketches for Lilac. And then that's lineup number 3, so I missed one. So they're not really showing much of anything. They have more final pictures of Virtual Girl at, but I skipped right past 2 of those announcements. So yeah, 4 games at the very beginning of their advertisement cycle there. Let's see. A aiding developed, I don't even know what aiding means, maybe that's the name of a company, fighting game Hunter x Hunter Mean X Impact has been announced. I feel like there was a Hunter x Hunter game that was in trouble because of the publisher going out of business, but obviously it's not this one. Is it wrong to try to pick up girls in a dungeon? Familia Myth, Fooland of Water and Light has been announced for console, which I guess that it means that they're still making games based on that series, although I don't know how popular it still is. Looking at this teaser trailer, it seems like there's several games that they've announced, including a Macros game, talking about a really old anime series. Let's see. Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation Quest of Memories launches this summer. It's a dungeon RPG game. I think there's definitely some craziness that Japanese companies are still making dungeon RPG games, but also I imagine companies like Bushido Road Games, they really don't have enough budget or staff or skill to do anything different. They can't be ambitious. They make all their money just by making a lot of games and selling them quickly and then making the next game. A game called Gift launches May 9th. It's a side-scrolling puzzle action game from Toydium and Millennium Edge. Toydium's an interesting name for a company. Yep, and this one's already on my follow list, so I'm assuming I made a YouTube short on it. And then let's see, Review Starlight El Dorado launches August 8th. Here you've got a all-female group of protagonists. So this might be one of those all-girl school JRPG events games. Yep. Let's see. I'll launch for PC via Steam on August 8th. See if we can get any story here. Not really that much. It's a visual novel. So, it seems like it's an all-girl visual novel. Maybe there's some girl-on-girl romance, maybe there isn't. It seems like it might just be action. It would be interesting though if there was no romance in a visual novel. Almost all of them do have some romance path if it's not the main focus. A lot of them it's the main focus. And then Reigns 3 Kingdoms is coming to Switch and PC on January 11th, which we'd already talked about that. Then that would bring us to GameDeveloper.com, which there's our broken element. Let's see, we've got a story here we didn't talk about. We got a story here we didn't talk about. And I think we've mostly talked about the rest of this. So, and while the fall list is loading, the fall list cleanup is not opening any tabs there, weirdly. So I still need to continue to do the fall list cleanup. Also need to fix my macros so they're not so broken. But yeah, we did have some GameDeveloper.com articles here. Phoenix Lab execs regroup to form Critical Path Games. Quote, I think our goals are more ambitious this time, and I think our focus will be tighter. Which, Phoenix Labs did what? That would be the question. Critical Path Games is an interesting title. Phoenix Labs was known for developing the likes of Dauntless, Fae Farm, Owens. Dauntless and Fae Farm. Which I've heard of Dauntless. I haven't heard of Fae Farm. Now they're restructuring to probably avoid some kind of debt and avoid some kind of mistakes and start over. Yeah, I like the name Critical Path Games. I don't like the logo. This does not really look too much like a P here, and nor does this look too much like a G. The logo looks pretty bad. Yeah, I would have just gone with the text alone. But yeah. And then an independent VR studio, Archaeatic, is making layoffs. The studio has worked on titles including Doom 3 VR Edition and Marvel Dimension of Heroes. Now I do have to say that I do really appreciate this new system. I've somehow managed, even when I feel like I'm going long, most of the days that I'm streaming, I'm only going right up to 3 hours, which is a great system, certainly, compared to the 4 and 5 hours I sometimes would stream in the past. It is very possible, though, once we start getting into the middle of the year, towards the end of the year, that streaming, there'll just be a lot more news and I will be back to 4 or 5 hours. But right now in January, I'm enjoying shorter streams. I wish my streams were even shorter, but I don't know a way of covering the news and really doing that other than just not playing Yu-Gi-Oh at all, which is still something people seem to really like. Anyways, that's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to support me further, there may be some links down below. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.